When you cease to be constantly accessible, a profound shift occurs. Initially, the change is subtle, almost imperceptible. Your decision to step back isn't accompanied by a loud announcement or an aggressive withdrawal. Instead, you quietly, gently, and without explanation, pull away from the fray. And in that moment, the world around you begins to transform. You start to discern who genuinely valued you as a person and who only appreciated the convenience of having you at their beck and call. You notice who reaches out to you, who respects your boundaries, and who inquires about your well-being, as opposed to those who grow uncomfortable with the new, more reserved you. Carl Jung grasped the essence of this transformation. He recognized that the discovery of one's true self is not solely achieved through accumulation or addition, but rather through subtraction, the removal of noise, the need for validation, and the compulsion to constantly respond. You stop performing for the sake of others' comfort and, in doing so, uncover your authentic self, unfiltered and untouched by the external world's demands. However, it's essential to acknowledge that this wasn't always your approach. There was a time when you were perpetually available, responding promptly to every call, and sacrificing your own time and energy to accommodate others. You believed that being constantly available made you valuable, that being present for everyone meant you mattered. But this mindset was rooted in fear of being forgotten, replaced, or perceived as selfish. Unbeknownst to you, this approach led to emotional bankruptcy. You were doling out pieces of yourself like free samples, hoping someone would eventually acknowledge your worth and grant you permission to rest. But no one did, because the moment you trained people to expect your constant presence, they began to view it as an entitlement rather than a gift. Jung's wisdom is particularly astute in this regard. He observed that loneliness doesn't arise from being alone, but from being unable to communicate your true feelings and needs. When you stop being constantly available, you're not being rude, you're being honest. You're conveying to the world that you're no longer a product, but a person, a whole, integrated individual. Initially, others may resist this change. They may try to guilt trip you, label you as distant, or claim that you've changed because, in their narrative, you existed solely to serve their story. But now you're writing your own story. And the truth is, most people won't admit that they don't miss the real you. They miss the version of you that made them feel better, the version that provided convenience, validation, and free emotional labor. As you reclaim your time, energy, and voice, you're not being selfish. You're being honest. You're not rejecting others. You're protecting yourself. You're not abandoning people. You're returning to your center. And when you do, everything changes. Your presence becomes more substantial, your words more impactful, and your silence more commanding. People will treat you differently, some with confusion, others with anger, and a select few with respect. You'll enter a room and speak less, but your words will carry more weight. You'll stop responding instantly, and as a result, you'll be taken more seriously. You'll no longer be everywhere, but when you do show up, you'll matter. Because scarcity creates value, and you, after all this time, are learning to value yourself. When you stop being constantly available, you're not just losing people. You're making room for depth, peace, and relationships where you don't have to be constantly on to be worthy. You're creating space for connections where you're loved not for how much you give, but for who you are. But to find that, you must clear space. And clearing space requires boundaries. Not walls or cruelty, but sacred lines that protect your energy and inform the world that you're not here to be consumed, but to live. This is what Jung meant by transformation. Not becoming more, but becoming less available to everything that distracts you from yourself. And when you do that, everything changes. People will treat you differently, and you'll walk into a room with a newfound presence, not because you're trying to be liked, but because you're being real. The real version of you doesn't owe constant access or endless explanations. It doesn't owe anyone the version of you that destroyed your peace just to keep the room calm. Jung would say that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But that's the doorway to freedom. Not loud, dramatic freedom, but quiet, clean, and uncompromised freedom. This freedom will cost you, but what you gain is the self that never needed to overgive. the self that didn't panic when ignored, the self that knows your presence is not a service, but sacred. And that self becomes unforgettable. Because in a world of noise, your stillness speaks. And in a world of constant availability, your distance becomes magnetic.